Those classmates who are unable to be here live, here's the virtual class expectations we view at the beginning of each class. You all do an amazing job with these. So I will move on here to our icebreaker question today, which is SpongeBob related. So here is the question. Which image best represents you today and why? We have SpongeBob, he's happy, he's ready to go. 2, we have Squidward, he's pouring his coffee, taking the day as it is. 3, we just have Patrick. I mean, I don't know how to explain it any other way. It's Patrick. And then 4, we have Sandy. She is super excited and she is ready to take on whatever comes her way. I see a 2, a 4, another 4. Yay, that's awesome. I feel like I'm a 1 with a little bit of a 2 just because I need more coffee still. Some 3s. I am always Patrick. Me is Patrick. Patrick is God. Okay. 2, 2, some more 2s. Yeah, we got a good mix going on here. Neat. Okay, so I'm going to move on to our agenda for the day. So we just finished the icebreaker question. And then for our Women's History Month profile, an eighth grader from my classes had put out Sally Ride as an option. And I selected Sally Ride as the person we're going to look at. And then we're going to be completing a assignment together in class. So if you are ready to go, just let me know in the chat that I'm ready to get started, or the thumbs up or an emoji. Yay, perfect. So for the Sally Ride profile, we're going to be completing a Padlet as we're watching a video on Sally Ride. So for the first question, you can start typing out your response here as I'm reading the questions and the prompts and the directions. So the link is in the chat. So during our quarter 3, week number 8 class connect, we looked at astronaut Sally Ride and her impact as the first American female in space. YouTube link. Answer each of the following prompts below. Make sure to include your first name and last initial within your post to receive credit. So the first question that you should be answering right now before we start the video is what do you know about space travel or NASA before watching this video? So that's the first question that you're answering now. And then we'll be answering number 2 together. I'll stop the video and we'll answer that one as a class. What was Sally Ride's job title and role in the mission? And then when we're done with the video, you'll write one thing you learned or one question you have after watching the video. And then the last one is what impact do you believe Sally Ride had on either? So you don't have to answer all 3 of those prompts within a question. Make sure you answer at least one. Space travel, fellow female astronauts, or women in general. So I will give you the next minute or so to write what you know about NASA in the first column, and I'll get the videos ready and started.
Sally was
Video is ready. Okay, it looks like we are ready to move on here to the video. And if you need a little more time working on the first one, you can always go back to it later. So I will pull up the video so we can get started.
Working very hard, and I was up near the pantry, and we found a bag of cashews. You had to be quick to grab the cashews because Sally was.
Sally Ride was America's first woman in space. She was one of 6 women who were selected together in 1978 to enter the U.S. Astronaut Corps. Sally Ride's personality was very open, friendly. She had a relaxed style about her, but an intensity of focus. She was selected to fly first for reasons known only to NASA. She really plunged into astronaut training with a great degree of discipline, worked very hard and impressed all of the senior astronauts and the trainers with her abilities. Sally Ride was a mission specialist on the 7th Space Shuttle mission.
Okay, so for the first part of question number 2, Sally Ride was a mission specialist on the 7th Space Shuttle mission. So that is the first part, and then we're gonna listen for the second part.
And her principal role was to operate the robotic arm, known as the RMS arm, the robotic manipulator.
And then her principal role was to operate the robotic arm, which was also known as the robotic manipulator system. So you can go back to the Padlet here. And then start answering for number 2. So for her job title again, it was a mission specialist, and she was operating on the robotic arm. So robotic manipulator system. Okay, so we're going to continue on with the rest of the video, and then if you need more time to answer 2, you can finish it later, and then you're going to answer 3 and 4 on your own.
System.
You can see slight oscillations in the arm, but it's really doing just about exactly what I'm commanding it to do. And it turned out to be a very easy task, and there's no problem at all.
She was very adept at mastering all the skills that were needed for that particular flight. If you look closely at her suit, you'll notice that her name badge simply says Sally. That's how she perceived herself. She didn't want her full formal name and title on the name tag. She flew with 4 men. They all wore the same uniforms. They all had the same tasks. And if you look carefully at the mission patch of the suit, there is a subtle symbol on the patch that looks a bit like a gear. It has 4 symbols for males and 1 symbol for a female. In that emblem, you can see that there is a woman on board a U.S. spacecraft for the first time. She felt very keenly that responsibility of performing very well so that it would pave the way for all women to be accepted into spaceflight. Sally Ride became a symbol of equality She did the same job that male astronauts had done and did the job excellently. She had broken a very high glass ceiling, the ceiling into space flight, and that's how we will remember her.
Okay, perfect. So let's go back to the Padlet questions here. So you're going to be answering number 3 and 4. The right one thing you learned or one question you have after watching the video. And what impact do you believe Sally Ride had on either space travel, fellow female astronauts, or women in general? And then make sure within your post that you have your first name and your last initial to receive credit. If I don't see your name within there, you will not receive credit for the Padlet. So I see there's some anonymouses still, so make sure that you put it in there. And for number 2, again, she was a mission specialist and she was working on the robotic arm or the RMS system. So if it does not contain that, you are not going to get points for it. I have repeated that multiple times, so I've made myself very clear. Okay, looks like we are ready to move on to our assignment for the day. So perfect.
Why is it anonymous? Wouldn't it be easier if it just wasn't and then we wouldn't have to put our...
Because some people have an account with Padlet, and that's why their names come up.
Oh.
Yeah.
I thought that was just like a setting.
No, like I
Yeah,
can't
like,
make you
oh.
have an account for Padlet. So for the people who chose to
Oh.
have one, that was their choice. So
Oh.
that's why I always say to include your first name and last initial to get your points. So even though it's like posted anonymously, then I know like whose is what post. So I'm gonna move on to our question. I'm gonna move on to our assignment here for the day. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna go to our US Studies page, as shown here. You're gonna scroll all the way down to the bottom to next week's work. I already have this published too, so that's perfect. And then you're gonna go to the Minnesota during the Civil War era. So once you are on this assignment, let me know, and then we'll get started. And then we'll do as much of the assignment as we can get done in class here today. But if you have to leave at a certain time, like a little bit before 11, then you can work on the rest on your own. So here's what the assignment looks like. And then I will read the directions and the learning targets, and then we'll start on slide number 4. Okay, so lesson 5.13, Minnesota during the Civil War era assignment directions. On slide number 4, you will be listening to an MN90 podcast and answer the question based on what you've heard. 2, view the images and read the paragraphs on slides 5 through 8 and answer the questions below each image. To finish the assignment, you will then complete the reflection page questions on slide number 9. Learning targets. Minnesota in the Civil War. I can explain the impact of Minnesotan soldiers and troops on the Civil War and reflection page. I can explain specific examples of Minnesota stories and why they are important. So I'm gonna go back to where you find it. So in our Minnesota Studies class, or US Studies class, my apologies. Yeah, so it's next week's assignment. So it's quarter 3, week number 9 folder, Approaching the Civil War. And then it is lesson 5.13, Minnesota during the Civil War era. So it's due before you leave for spring break. And then we're gonna get a head start and work on it together right now in class. So once you are in the assignment and on slide number 4, let me know in the chat that you are ready to go and you have the assignment pulled up. Yes, I see quite a few people are ready. And then Addie, do you have a question? And then Eliana, the whole week number 9 folder is published. Do you want to refresh your page? Maybe this is messing with the settings. Because I did just open it up like 5 minutes before class started. So if you already had it pulled open from before then, it was not opened. So you have to like refresh your screen. And Addie, no worries. And then here's our class copy. That way I can type with you guys as you're working on it. Okay, looks like we're ready to go. So on slide number 4, Minnesota Civil War Medal. MN90 episode, here are the questions. What did Governor Ramsey do well in DC? What was the first Minnesota regiment famous for? And how many Minnesotans fought in the Civil War?
Welcome to NN90, Minnesota history in 90 seconds.
On the day the Confederate troops fired on Fort Sumter, South Carolina in April 1861, Minnesota's Governor Alexander Ramsey happened to be in Washington, D.C. It was clear the Civil War was underway, and Ramsey was eager to get some Minnesotans into the fight.
He literally raced over to the War Department,
Historian Matthew Cassidy
scrawled on a piece of paper, Minnesota will pledge 1,000 militia to fight for the Union Army, which ended up becoming the first Minnesota regiment.
Cassidy says pledging troops to the war early wasn't just...
Okay, so for the first question, what did Governor Alexander Ramsey do while in Washington, D.C.? If you would like to write on your document or put in the chat, I can also type it up here as we go along. So he pledged I don't know how to spell that, but I will fix it. Okay. How does Miss G's answer look? So he pledged 1,000 militia to fight for the Union cause in what later became known as the Minnesota 1st Regiment. Okay, do we need a little more time or should I move on to number 2 for this one? Can somebody answer in the chat? Are we ready to move on or no? Oh, thank you, Chaz. Yay, Addie and Sam, thank you.
About politics.
Minnesota was a brand new state. It was kind of a way to prove Minnesota's mettle.
The first Minnesota regiment's most famous engagement was at Gettysburg in July 1863. On the second day of that battle, Minnesota soldiers held off advancing Confederates long enough for the rest of the Union troops to withdraw to a safer position. Cassidy says over 80% of the Minnesota soldiers fighting that day at Gettysburg were killed, wounded, or captured.
They went down in glory for saving the Union line on the second day.
By the time the Civil War ended in 1865, Minnesota had furnished 25,000 soldiers to the Union Army.
MN90 is a co-production of the Minnesota Historical Society.
Oops, I did not mean to accidentally exit that link there. We'll put that there. Oops, it was 2,500. Okay, I gotta fix that. Okay, so what was Minnesota's first regiment most famous for? They were most famous in Gettysburg in 1863. They held off Confederates until more Union militia could come. Does anybody have anything they would like to add on number 2? And then number 3 is 2,500 soldiers. Okay, let me know when we're ready to move on to number 5. Thank you, Addie. Okay, so we have 2 people here we're going to be learning about different Minnesotan soldiers. Would anybody like to volunteer to read about the first one? And then read this paragraph right here. Would anybody like to volunteer to read this? Okay, thank you, Addie.
With the fall of Fort Sumter in 1861, Minnesota became the first state to offer troops to fight the Confederacy. Josias Redgate King is credited with being the first man to volunteer for the Union in the Civil War.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to read the second paragraph too quick? And then that's it?
Here. In 1885, King was appointed Inspector General of the Minnesota National Guard with the rank of brigadier general. He made significant reforms in the Guard and was thereafter referred to as the father of the Minnesota Guard.
Okay, so for who he was, so we see that Minnesota was the first state to offer their troops to fight against the Confederacy, ordered from Alexander Ramsey. So here, King is the first man to volunteer for the Union in the Civil War. So he was the first man to volunteer. He was also known for, so we learned that he became the Inspector General of the National Guard. He was also a big reformer within the Guard, so he garnished and gained the name Father of the National Guard. Okay, and then I'm going to go back to that podcast quick to see the exact number of soldiers, since we had a question on that. Okay, so by the time the war ended in 1865, Minnesota had furnished more than 25,000 soldiers to the Union Army. Ah, okay. And then more than 2,500 died. Got it. So it is 25,000. You are correct. I was just looking at how many died in the Civil War. So 25,000 soldiers fought. So my apologies. Thank you, Grayson, for clarifying that and getting that corrected. Okay, so I will move on to Albert Henry Wilson. Do we have one more volunteer for reading? And then Miss G will do this huge one on slide number 6. So anybody want to read that small little paragraph right there? Okay, thank you, Ty. Yeah, you can start whenever.
Wait, which one?
This one right here.
Okay. Albert Henry Wilson had outlived the other 2 million Civil War Union Army comrades when he had died in Duluth on August 2nd, 1956, at the age of 106. At his death, he was recognized as the living surviving Union Army veteran. Civil War historians, however, now recognize him as the last survivor of both the Union and Confederate armies.
Yep. Okay. So who was Albert Henry Wilson? Does anybody want to write in the chat who he was? Yeah, 106. He got super lucky. I know. That is a long lifespan. Okay. So Wilson was a member of the U.S. Army during the Civil War for the Union. He was known for being the last survivor of both the Union and the Confederate armies. Okay, there you go. I put that in the chat. Okay, and then let me know when you are ready to move on to the sixth one. And I will do number 6 for you guys. I will read all those. Okay, do we need some more time? I'm just checking in. I see, oh, okay, I see some more thumbs ups. Perfect. Okay, so slide number 6, Brackett's Battalion. Recruited in the fall of 1861, Brackett's Battalion served longer than any other Minnesota unit during the Civil War. After campaigning in the Western Theater, the battalion participated in the Northwestern Indian expeditions of 1864 and 1865. The men of Brackett's battalion were recruited as the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd companies of Minnesota's Volunteer Cavalier. The captain of the 3rd company was Alfred B. Brackett. During the winter of 1861 through 1862, the companies were stationed at Benton Barracks near St. Louis, Missouri. Conditions were terrible and many of the men fell ill. The companies were assigned to a cavalry regiment in the Department of Missouri called the Curtis Horse. Brackett was made major of the 3rd Battalion, which consisted of 4 companies. In February 1862, the Curtis Horse joined the Union Army of Tennessee. Okay, so what was the significance of Brackett's battalion in Minnesota? So their significance was they served longer than any other Minnesota unit during the Civil War. Oh, I'm not talking at the moment, but I was typing, but I can start talking again. They served longer than any other unit in Minnesota during the Civil War. Okay, does anybody remember where they were stationed in 1861 to 1862? Would anybody like to unmute themselves to say where they were stationed? Or write in the chat? Yep, thank you, Addie. So they were stationed at Benton. Okay, and then the last question, I will take another volunteer to. So which Union Army did Brackett's Battalion Curtis Horse join in February of 1862? If you'd like to unmute yourself or put it in the chat, feel free to. Okay, so what state did they join?
Tennessee.
Thank you. Okay, so now we are on slide number 7. I'll read the first one and Well, the first one's a little shorter. Does anybody want to read the first one and I will read the second one? And this is the last thing to be read out loud during class too. Then I need a volunteer.
I can.
Okay, thank you.
During the Civil War era, Fort Snelling served as an introduction and training center for nearly 25,000 soldiers. Many of them fought in the Civil War. Around 1,400 of the troops raised at the fort served in the U.S. Dakota War of 1862. After that war, a concentration camp
Yep.
for Dakota non-combatants was established near the fort.
Perfect. Thanks, Jake. While at the post, recruits learned the basics of soldiering. They spent the majority of their time marching, drilling with their weapons, and standing guard duty. After the draft began in 1863, several wooden barracks were built outside the fort's walls to accommodate the large number of new soldiers. At times, there were so many soldiers at the fort that some lived in tents. So, what did they do at Fort Snelling during the Civil War area? Civil War era. Oh my gosh, so much speaking. Okay. Okay, so the recruits learned how to become soldier. They spent a lot of their time marching, drilling. Perfect. Okay, so that is the answer to the first one.
What you miss?
And then, so the purpose of Fort Snelling, I think somebody has themselves on microphone, so it's kind of amplifying. There we go. Cool. The purpose was as an induction and training center for the Union soldiers. Okay, so that's it for slide number 7. And then the last questions on slide number 8, you need to answer on your own, and then you can submit it when you're done. For the reflection page, which story did you enjoy learning about Minnesota during the Civil War era? And why are these 2 stories important to Minnesota history during the Civil War? So I'm going to end the recording.